Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project, and thank you so much for tuning in. I have the most amazing guest with me today, and she's going to educate us on medications, the risks and the benefits. Her name is Suzanne Robotti. She is an FDA Consumer Representative, drug side effects expert, DES daughter, founder of the MedShadow Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that encourages people to think for themselves, tells you not to believe everything you read online, to do your own diligent research, and balance the risks with the benefits of medication. Sue launched MedShadow Foundation in 2013 because she was harmed by a medication called DES that was given to her mother when she was pregnant with Sue. At the age of 13, Sue learned she would never be able to have children because of the side effects of DES. Generations later, DES has been found to cause rare cancers, autoimmune diseases, and infertility. In 2017, Sue was appointed to the FDA Advisory Committee on Drug Safety and Risk Management as the lone consumer representative on a panel of doctors and pharmacists. She considers it a privilege to have a seat at the table when the FDA is deciding if a drug is safe and effective enough to use. Sue, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I'm delighted to be here.
Wow, what a story. And,
Mm,
I can't imagine finding out at the age of 13 that you'll never
hmm,
be able to have children. How did that happen? How did that come about?
sure. Well, the drug diethylstilbestrol, we call it DES, was given to between 5 and 10 million pregnant women in the decades of the 1940s all the way through to 1971.
Jeez.
And the drug was given to women who were considered to be at risk of miscarrying. And it was the very first synthetic estrogen. So this synthetic estrogen was much more powerful than your body could ever create. And
Mm,
it was never fully considered what the long-term effects would be. At the time, the medical field believed a couple of things that were wrong. They believed that the placental barrier would protect the fetus from anything the mother did. So back in the 1940s, 50s, and even the 60s, women were, encouraged to consider smoking and drinking to keep calm and, not disrupt their lives with pregnancy. And obviously, we now know that there are many things that can cross the placental barrier and some things
mhm.
that it does filter out, but you have to be careful. And it was also believed that when side effects occurred with drugs or adverse events, um, it would happen immediately. So that also turned out not to be true. And that was almost more seismic. They were both seismic
Mhm.
changes in thinking in the medical community. So back to the beginning. My mother had had a miscarriage or two, depending on how you define miscarriage. And so when she was pregnant with me, she was given DES. And I was born healthy. I was full 9 pounds, 12 ounces. I was a big baby
Mhm.
and grew up perfectly healthy and strong. But when I got to my puberty, things looked like they were moving along fine. My body shape and change, all that
Mhm.
changed, but I didn't get a period. And my mother had read about DES and it's linked to a rare vaginal uterine cancer that had been discovered in 1971. And so she took me to the doctor and said, I was given this drug. I remember it very well. Can you check her? And I fortunately did not have uterine or cervical cancer, partly because I don't have a cervix and I have only an infant sized uterus. So, good news, bad news.
Wow.
I was unlikely to get that particular cancer, but that's when they realized that I was also not ever going to be able to bear a child. So when you learn something like that at 13, it kind of shapes the way you think about your future.
Mhm.
The back then, this was obviously the early 70s. There were things like uterine transplants, or even the ability, artificial insemination wasn't around yet,
Mhm.
and the ability for one woman to carry a child for another is just being explored at that point. I was lucky because even though, so let me explain more about what DES does. As
Mhm.
a synthetic estrogen, the fetus floated in this, and it affected the estrogen testosterone balance in many babies. And
Mhm.
which is probably why, I guess, why my organs didn't develop correctly. But in those fetuses then born, it was found, the cancer that was found was very rare, and it
Mhm.
it didn't show up until these girls were 17 to 24, who were that when a cluster was found and it was traced back to DES, which is when they realized it was doing harm. So
Wow.
that's the second thing that the medical community learned, was that it never occurred to them that a drug you're exposed to as a fetus could affect you as a young adult, but
Mhm.
it can. And we now realize that there can be a delayed adverse drug reaction
Mhm.
or adverse event with
Mhm.
a drug, delayed by decades necessarily. Again, I was lucky I did not have that, but like many other women, I had malformed fertility organs. Mine were a bit unique. Um, More commonly, you still hear about people having a T-shaped uterus
Mhm.
or a tilted uterus.
Mhm.
This were uh, this is common among DES daughters. So the women given the drug, the pregnant women, were called DES mothers, still are. The offspring are DES daughters and sons, and now we have DES grandchildren and DES great grandchildren.
So it's
Uh,
still being passed on generationally.
because it was also the very first endocrine disruptor that was
Oh.
introduced into the ecosphere.
Oh.
So it has affected the subsequent generations. We don't quite know, because science is a rear view mirror science,
Mhm. Mhm.
medical sciences, a whole generation has to go by before they can say, and this is the effect it had. I can tell you for DES daughters, they tended to have early onset breast cancer in their 30s and 40s. You'd see breast cancer in them. If you can get to the age of, say, 50, 55 without breast cancer, which I did, your risk goes back to normal
Mhm.
because so many of us already had it.
Mhm.
There's endometriosis, fibroids. Many women have them. It doesn't mean you were exposed to DES or that your grandmother was exposed to DES, but it's just a much higher rate in
Mhm.
DES daughters, probably again because of all the hormones that were given to
Mhm.
us. So the sons also had some malformed fertility organs. It all seemed to affect fertility organs. They
Mhm.
tended to have tumors on their penis. They had other malformations, but because it wasn't cancer, they never quite got the attention that the
Mhm.
daughters did. So
Mhm.
now we're looking at third generation, and we're seeing unexplained infertility. We're seeing a late onset of menstruation, which does affect your bone density throughout life.
Mhm.
And we're seeing a psychological damages. The
Mhm.
depression was also high, going all the way back to the DS mothers, probably because of all the hormones they were given. Very high rate of breast cancer at the quote unquote normal times, but much higher than the average
Wow.
woman. So it was a drug that was. There are no bad drugs, but if there were, it'd be DES, because there are very few uses that are safe for it, and in very few dosages.
Mhm.
So it's almost not used at all anymore. It was
Mhm.
never withdrawn from the market. It was simply contraindicated for pregnancy. So,
Wow. So
um,
I want to go back to the DES sons because okay, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and my mind it's always very busy in here. And I was thinking about the DES, because we're going to have this conversation today. And I remember I had a client that I absolutely adored. And he was a physician and he was probably, early 60s. And he had, oh my gosh, what's it called?
oh,
Gynecomastia.
when men have breast growth.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And so he developed very large female breasts. And this was a big man. He was probably 6 foot, 4 and very masculine. And, the first time I saw him, I thought, Something's a little different." And it wasn't until, I got to know him and he told me that his mother had been given DES when she was pregnant with him. And he started developing breast tissue probably when he was in his 30s or 40s. He was an adult when it started happening. And he
Strange.
said, and he says, it was the most incredibly painful experience. I mean, not only psychologically, emotionally, but physically as he was developing these breasts. And, he said there was nothing really they could do about it except maybe do, bilateral mastectomy. And he says, I'm just not going to do that.
That is so interesting. That is not a typical DES outcome for men that I've heard.
Hmm.
You can imagine it makes some sort of sense,
Hmm.
unfortunately. But
Hmm.
I feel so sympathetic to him, and good for him for refusing what is essentially unnecessary surgery,
Hmm.
because every surgery and every drug you take comes with risk of
Hmm.
side effect. So
Hmm. And especially as a physician himself. I mean, I was really, a little bit surprised, but, definitely like kudos for you not going under the knife because,
yeah.
as you said, there are a lot of risks to any kind of surgery or any kind of medication.
And pain too.
Well,
There's
yeah.
scarring, there's pain, it's
Hmm.
so good for him. Although it's a difficult challenge in life.
Hmm.
Well, and so you asked what it was like. And so when I was 13 and found this out, I just decided that I was going to be, a businesswoman and not have
Hmm.
children and, never get married and all that kind of stuff. And so I pointed myself that direction. And you grow up, you meet people, you think about stuff. I did fall in love and I got married. And he knew, of course, before we got married, that children were not going to be possible for us.
Hmm.
Interestingly, at that point, in vitro fertilization was all the big deal. It was mid 80s. It was like,
Hmm.
the big thing. And his parents, when they found out and they were told ahead of time, they said, please don't do IVF because the Catholic Church was against it and they're Catholics. And I thought, well, that solves a lot of problems because IVF is only one part. You have to have someone to carry that egg. And I wasn't sure if I'd ask a sister. I have 3 sisters. That could be tricky. So,
Hmm.
and I was just as relieved because I had decided I was going to have kids. So,
Hmm.
and we could have adopted, but it was all fine with him.
Hmm.
But a weird thing happened. We've been married forever, which is a good thing. But years into our marriage, we had a very friendly relationship with all of our nieces and nephews, and they came to
Hmm.
visit, particularly between the ages of 8 and 12, because I like those ages. And
Hmm.
we take them around Manhattan. Well, my one of our siblings had a very difficult divorce and was going through a very tough time. And she had 3 sons and a daughter, and the third son was just the problem child. The older ones were beating up on him. He was
Oh.
always causing trouble. It was just, how one kid tends to get blamed for stuff. And he was, to be honest, a little bit of a pain in the neck, but he was that age. He was 12 years old.
Mm.
So she called and she said, I need him to be somewhere else. He needs another home, at least for
Mm.
a while. And so we said, have him come live with us. We'll try for a year, we'll see how it goes. So he came up to New York City and, moved into our apartment. Poor kid. I kept him on a pull-out couch for a year, thinking this is temporary. He never left. He's wonderful. He's a grown-up now.
Mhm.
It was a tough transition, but part of the tough transition was he came to New York City, we put him in a Catholic school
Mhm.
because getting into a public school is a whole thing.
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to do that. And we knew how to apply to a Catholic school. So, and I'm not even Catholic, but my husband is, obviously.
Mhm.
And within a month, the principal, knowing the full background, we had told the principal everything, called up and said, you need to put this kid on Ritalin because he's totally ADHD. And I said, is he really ADHD or is he just a kid who's going through a troubled time? and
Mhm.
just moved to a new city, and we're crappy parents because we don't know what we're doing. And
Mhm.
he said, no, no, we know it's AD, we know ADHD, we know kids, you can trust us, get them on this. And I said, can we have a little time to
Mhm.
figure this out? And he said, okay. So, we continued going through life, but a month later, time was up. I got the phone call again. "You Get him this ADHD drug or he's out of here." And I couldn't have that happen to him. So we went to a specialist. So many specialists in New York City, but we went to a specialist who, after 20 minutes, handed me a prescription for Ritalin at 10 milligrams and said, here's a prescription, give this to him once a day. And, or twice, I forget what the thing was. And I should say this is back in 2005,
Mhm.
2005. And if this doesn't work, we can double the prescription. If that doesn't work, we've got Wellbutrin, we've got Adderall. Don't worry, we'll get this kid under control. I
Oh.
did not like that. I didn't like that at all. So I said, okay, I live in New York. So I know the side effects of Ritalin. Everyone in New York does, and probably
Mhm.
anyone listening to the show also knows, but it creates a jitteriness, it lowers the appetite. It can affect your height and weight because you're not eating. There's mood swings. There's also benefits to it, to be fair.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
focus is absolutely better. They can sit for longer periods of time, and even though they're jittery, they can stay, stay like a puppy.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
And
So
to ask a little boy, I mean, and let's face it, 12 years old, you're still a little boy. And all of that pent up energy, instead of finding an outlet for it that's really healthy, to
yes,
just suppress.
yeah, just sit there.
Yeah.
So we did get him into martial arts right away because of that. Yes. And I said to this doctor, well, what are the long-term effects of giving Ritalin to a
Mhm.
kid? And he said, long-term effects. There are no long-term effects. And I said, really? Because it's a drug designed to affect your brain, and his brain is hitting puberty and growing. There's no side effect? And he said, no, no. And I said, great. Can I see the study? And he said, oh, there's no studies. But I've been giving it to kids for, at that point, 15 years, and I would know. Well, I know from DES that if you're not looking for it, it takes a miracle, like a cluster of
Mhm.
7 poor 19 to 24-year-olds who with cancer for DES to discover that drug is doing harm.
Wow.
So it's not hard to imagine that this kid never got that drug.
Mhm.
I couldn't do it to him. We discussed it with him. We discussed it with the family. And we just decided to power through
Mhm.
and, just keep working at it. And it was tough. And we were fortunate that we had the resources and the fortitude, and I had the
Mhm.
time to put
Mhm.
into being there and staying with him. He had no friends in New York City. I was his best
Oh.
friend for the first year or two before he could make friends. He went into a school that started kindergarten. He entered in sixth grade. These kids have been together, it's hard to break
Right.
in. So, I mean, so many factors going on. But
Mhm.
we were also in a position to hire a diagnostician who
Mm.
could do a full panel diagnosis, which took 3 to 4 weeks. This diagnostician interviewed us, interviewed his birth parents, interviewed his teachers, watched him in the classroom, gave him multiple tests at appropriate time periods so he could
Mhm.
focus and do the tests, and discovered that, there's a little ADHD.
Mhm.
But more importantly, he had 2 or 3 learning challenges, none of
Mm.
which were significant on their own, but put together was just increasing his symptoms of ADHD. Because what
Mhm.
12-year-old boy isn't going to act out in class and be the clown and, so, or girl, anyone who's
Mhm.
struggling. So we used whole foods. We
Mhm.
took everything, every uh, snack food out of his diet. His snacks
Mhm.
turned into, fruit or grilled cheese with all natural
Mhm.
cheese and no sugar added bread. And
Mhm.
and then we increased the amount of martial arts he was doing. He became very active in magic. We were able to we could afford to hire coaches, tutors for him, which
Mhm.
really never worked. He just refused to actually do his homework. It was so painful. For several years, it was a real
Mhm.
struggle. And even after stopping a struggle and much more of a pleasure, he still really refused to do his homework through high school and made a problem. But somewhere in the middle of college years, he got it. He became interested in business and how business works, and compounding money was like a
Mhm.
breakthrough concept for him. Anyway, long story long, he's now young 30s. He's wonderful. He's an adult. He's a salesperson, as every
Mhm.
ADHD person should be.
Mhm.
It fits him so well. He's happy, and he's made his own life, and he's launched.
Mhm.
And I'm no longer picking him up after school, which is good.
Okay, so
So
you
much to
just
unpack.
you just won the award for best aunt ever. And actually, I thought I was the number one aunt, in all the world, but no, you have surpassed me. So,
Thanks.
what a wonderful story. And, you know, eh, how did you know what to do?
I Well, I did not, and there's a lot to unpack in that story. But it turned me from a person who had been harmed passively by adverse events or side effects of drugs, where there's nothing I could do about it, and it already happened and it was done, into an advocate. And
Mhm.
I'd never needed to advocate for anybody. I was healthy, my husband was healthy.
Mhm.
Advocacy on someone else's or even my own behalf in health was not something that had never ever been needed.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
had to. And I started that day it started when when the principal picked up the phone and said, get him on drugs. That's the day it started. And the first thing I did was ask for time.
Mhm.
Unless you've been hit by a car, even with
Mhm.
cancer, there's almost always some time,
Time.
and take it. Even if it's breast cancer and it's scary, I get that. Give
Mhm.
yourself some time to get a second opinion, as we did, to talk to friends. I reached out to friends who had kids that I hadn't talked to in 15 years to say, what do I do now?
Mhm.
And sometimes the advice was helpful, sometimes it was not. It's okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
I You take some time just to get used to it.
Mhm.
And then you ask what the options are. What will happen if I don't take this drug, if I don't give this drug, if I do
Mhm.
nothing? And, in this case, it was he could get kicked out of school. The doctors said he could self-harm. Many ADHD kids will self-medicate, they'll self-harm, they'll explode, and there'll be bits of them all over the room. I don't know. I know a lot of kids who had ADHD
Yeah.
as kids and are wonderful grown-ups, whether they had access to medicine or not.
Mhm.
I know mothers who used ADHD in a very strategic way, and you can often use medicine in a strategic way.
Mhm.
In this case, what they did was they gave them the short-acting Ritalin right before study time, and then
Oh.
not. And so they'd had them study and help them with their study habits so they could learn it when they were on the Ritalin,
Mhm.
and then they became a habit. So when they were off the Ritalin, they could take them off and they could succeed. So look, ask what your alternatives are. Are there holistic things you can do besides medicines?
Mhm.
We gave this kid, I'm trying not to use his name because he deserves some privacy too,
Mhm.
although his last name is different from ours.
Mhm.
We gave him vitamin D and fish oil for
Mhm.
cognitive sharpening.
Mhm.
Again, we made sure that we ate frequently and often and as a family.
Mhm.
We engaged in as much conversation with him as we could. He just wouldn't stop talking. So he happened to be a very verbal person. He still is,
Uh-huh.
which is so helpful, particularly in
Mhm.
times of stress. there
Mhm.
are people who go into themselves and hide,
Mhm.
and it's hard to open them up.
Mhm.
This kid was he's an open book, which was
Mhm.
wonderful, so helpful.
Mhm. Mhm.
What else can you do? So, and you try those things. You use your time, you use your knowledge, and then you look things up. When
Mhm.
I heard that there were no long-term studies
Mhm.
of Ritalin, I called my internist and asked
Oh.
her. I called my friend who is a pharmacist. I walked into my local pharmacy and asked that pharmacist. And then I got online and found out there's something called the Cochrane reports, which you'll be directed to. There's Google studies. There are authoritative, reasonably independent study access or information access. Make sure you're
Mhm.
not getting it from the American ADHD Society, which doesn't exist, but any of
Mhm.
them, because
Mhm.
they take money from drug companies. So they're going to
Mhm.
say medicine will be very helpful. And
Mhm.
honestly, medicine would have been very helpful. I
Mhm.
just didn't want to take the risk.
Mhm.
Um, so, you get a dictionary and you read a few studies and you become familiar with what the general thinking is, and you look for some alternative thoughts that aren't crazy. I mean,
Mhm.
cold plunges are not going to solve the
Ooh,
ADHD problem. You have to
yeah.
use common sense and you have to live in the real world.
Mhm.
But you can do this. You can
Mhm.
become an advocate.
Mhm. I think that, especially nowadays, this day and age, there's a lot more emphasis on natural healing and a lot more emphasis. There are so many naturopaths, functional medicine doctors, holistic health practitioners, and I have even interviewed several MDs, medical doctors, who left very lucrative practices to just go off into the alternative medical realm because they were so, one guy was almost, he was very radical anti-medication, and he was a cardiologist. And he was, told me all the side effects. He told me the medications that didn't work. And I mean, so there's a lot more possibilities, I think, and a lot more options than like you had when you were taking, your nephew in. But again,
Yes.
I say you are the best aunt and your husband is the best uncle ever. And I also found it very interesting and very compelling that, once he got out of high school and he got into college, something clicked and he started studying. I'm guessing is because he found something that was interesting. Because
Yes.
I think a lot of times in school, they shovel stuff at us, here, learn this, and it's not interesting. And if we don't have any interest, why are we going to study and learn it?
Someone during that process, someone said to me, high school is the only time in your life where you are expected to be an expert in everything. You have to get A's in every class despite your interest level. And he
Mm,
got to college and he could select classes he was interested in.
mm-hmm,
It was not a sit in your seat from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m.
mm-hmm,
And he grew up a little bit.
mm-hmm.
Brains don't mature until, what do they say? Say for girls 21 to 22 and for boys 24 to
25.
25.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In some cases, I think even later, but that's just my personal opinion.
You and I were talking about neuroplasticity just before
Mm-hmm,
this started. And
mm-hmm,
I did read, and I published a blog on this a while ago. There was a study on neuroplasticity and cannabis exposure. And it does thicken the neuroplasticity. It slows it down, which makes sense. I mean, tropes, what people, jokes that people make about categories of groups of people, unfortunately, sometimes have some truth in it. And, there's that movie, Dude, Where'd I Leave My Car? Because they were stoned. This whole stoner concept,
mm-hmm,
there's a little bit of reason for that. And it's apparently quite a challenge to get that plasticity back.
mm-hmm.
So that's one
Well,
of the reasons
Sue, I live in Colorado, so we're kind of like the cannabis capital of the world,
you are.
which, and everybody was like, "Yay, this is fantastic," and it's really not. And some of the
There are
things,
not enough
no,
studies.
no, there are not enough studies, and even one of the gentlemen, I use that term loosely, who was, you know, critical in getting the law passed for, to legalize cannabis in Colorado, said now, he was interviewed recently and said he wished he never had done it because the harm that it has caused the state and some of the things that have happened, we've had a lot of loss of life, including very young children who find these gummies and start eating them. I mean, it's just really, really sad what's happening. And no medication comes without some kind of either potential side effect or side effect.
Mhm. Yes, there is no anything you ingest, even food, has a side effect and
Right.
has an effect. So you think before you swallow. Use topical if you can. If you need
Hmm.
something, try to use topical instead of swallowing it.
Hmm.
Because also, when you swallow something, it
Hmm.
goes throughout your whole system. So, it hits your mouth, it goes to your stomach, it has to go through into your digestive system to hit your liver or your kidneys if it's a medicine, and that's where it distributes through your body. And look
Hmm.
at how much it's hit before it even gets distributed, which
Right.
is just to jump topics, and we should not go into this because it's a whole nother area. But you look at Ozempic and Wegovy and how they're affecting so many different parts of your system. This scares the bejesus out of me
Hmm.
because if it's that powerful, what else is it doing? I'm
Hmm.
just not comfortable, which is something else I do want to say. When you are at a doctor's office and the doctor has suggested a medicine and
Hmm.
you're convinced that you should take this, that there's not a lifestyle intervention, or you've tried lifestyle interventions and
Hmm.
that's not helped your cholesterol or whatever,
Hmm.
your high blood pressure. Do your best to never take the new drug. Always take an older drug first.
Hmm.
They say fail, fail, fail until you find the drug that
Hmm.
works for you. Start with the old ones. And that's because when the FDA approves a drug, it is based on, at most, two studies. The studies that I have seen, having been on an FDA advisory committee for 7 years, tend to have between 800 and 1,200 people in them, depending on the drug, less and very few more. I don't think I've seen a study more than 2,000 in all these years. So they don't know all the side effects. They certainly do not know the long-term effects or the delayed effects. And this is borne out by a recent study that showed uh, that on an average of 4.2 years after a drug has been approved by the FDA, 32% of them end up with an important new health warning that comes out. Either letters are sent to doctors, or a black box warning goes on the drug, or it gets withdrawn from the market. So 1 in 3 has such a significant health side effect that doctors have to be warned. Try not to be that 1 in 3. You want to go back to penicillin,
Hmm.
one of the oldest drugs there is.
Hmm.
Try whatever you can that's older, because the longer it's been in the marketplace, the better an idea the safety profile
Hmm.
and the interaction profile it has. Drugs interact with other drugs,
Hmm.
and they interact with food, and they interact with herbal
Hmm.
supplements. Do
Hmm.
not think that herbal supplements are safe, by the
Hmm.
way. Herbal supplements are they're the Wild West. Nobody
Hmm.
checks what's inside of them.
Hmm.
Study after study comes out. Every 2 years, we get a new study that says, we checked 60 herbal supplements off the shelves of your local drugstore and found out that, 20% had too high a concentration, more than they said of it. 20% had none of what they said it had, and no vitamin A in it at all. And 20%, and I'm making up 20%, of course,
Right.
and another 15 or 20% had drugs that weren't supposed to be in there, weren't on the label, weren't legal to be in there. So, and of course, the two categories of supplements that you can buy that are the biggest offenders of having drugs that are not acknowledged on the label or legal would be erectile dysfunction drugs. You buy it off the internet or GNC or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and erectile dysfunction drug, and all of a sudden you're happy dappy because you're taking Viagra. And that's very dangerous if you have any kind of heart condition. There's a
Mm-hmm.
reason it's a prescribed drug. And exercise, pre-workout, post-workout, exercise, anything to increase your muscle mass, they find steroids in that routinely.
Right.
And steroids, again, are a prescribed drug for a reason. They're very dangerous and they affect your mood and actions while you're on them. So you need to know you're on them so that
Mm-hmm.
you can moderate for that.
Mm-hmm. So, did it scare the heck out of you when you got on your FDA advisory, committee and started learning these things? Because I mean, you do have done your diligent due diligence and all of your research, so you were already pretty well educated in a lot of this. But did you have like surprises along the way when you started that? And before I have you answer that, you just really hit on a nerve with me when you said Ozempic, because I cannot stand when these commercials come on. I mean, my husband and I just have to turn the TV off when they're singing and dancing about their one little pill and they're just so happy. And all you have to do is just take this pill and everything's fine. And then, they kind of list some of the side effects that you might want to think about, including this, and death.
Yeah, it's always and death.
And
Yes.
death.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's sadly, there are studies that show that people watch these commercials and think that the disclosures at the end of the commercial um, are mean that the drug company is honest, and therefore they trust that drug more.
Mm.
What it does is it's required by the FDA,
Mhm.
and they only list the worst possible effects. They don't tell you all the other life interrupting effects like sleeplessness or nervousness or anxiety or
Or
and
nausea.
and yeah, on the drug on the one of the things I learned being on the committee was that these are considered well-tolerated drugs. These meaning drugs that hardly kill anybody and well, every drug can kill someone, that's unfortunately the fact. They
Mhm.
reach toxicity level rather quickly. That's why they're prescribed, so you can't take too much by mistake. Um, so, but drugs that um, uh, I was actually on the drug advisory panel that voted whether to approve Wegovy in its very first iteration as a diabetes drug. And when I was on that committee in it, the doctor said, well, this is really a crappy drug. It does have cardiovascular properties that we like. We don't know why that's good. We
Mhm.
know that we know why that's good, but we don't know why it has that property. And we like that people are losing weight, but in the unless you have a lot of support for diet and exercise, the weight loss is only maybe 7 or 8 pounds for most people. It's 5 to 10%, which is fairly small still when you're a big person.
Mhm. Mhm.
But what we were all struck by is that something like 30% of the people in the human trials, in the clinical trials, quit the trial because the nausea, the
Oh,
gastric upset was so severe, they would rather not stay in the trial at all. And
wow.
the people in these trials that are presented to the FDA advisory thing are generally the healthiest people they can find with the condition. So there'll be people who are very overweight because they're testing overweight, but don't have
Mhm.
diabetes.
Mhm.
People who are overweight but don't have cardiovascular issues. All the normal things that happen. If it's an opioid drug, which I was on several panels for, it would be, first of all men, as if women don't take opioids, which is stupid. Uh, yeah. And they and they would find men who weren't addicted and had no other diseases and therefore tested an opioid on them. I mean, which is good. You don't want to be testing on an addict, but on the other hand, when it's supposed to be anti-abusive, it's all just a mess. It's a
Mhm.
mess there. But the most striking thing was the drug company presenting Wegovy had the nerve to call this drug well tolerated to the FDA committee. And it didn't take a PhD from me to read this study and say, when you've got a dropout rate like that, and you still have very high numbers of people with a lot of gastric discomfort, nausea, puking, the
Wow.
whole bit, I don't consider that well tolerated, but it is by pharmaceutical companies. And so you don't see that on the Wegovy thing, but it affects something like, 60% of all people on Wegovy and
Mhm.
Ozempic have significant amounts of problems like that. So sorry, I didn't want to go into all that, but yes.
No, I'm glad that you did. And, when I was in, how old was I? I was probably in my early 40s and I was having some issues. And I was given this medication to take, and it was making me really, really nauseous. And I went back to the doctor, and, I says, I'm really nauseous. I'm losing weight, and this isn't good. And, I can't eat. And he said, oh, well, let's try this other medication. And he walks out and he comes back with a little sample.
Yes.
And I turned it over and I looked, and the very first side effect that it was listed was nausea. And I said, hey, I'm already nauseated. I can't eat. And this is the first side effect that it's listing. He goes, we'll give you something for the nausea. And I'm like,
Huh.
I am not a chemistry set here or a chemistry experiment.
What you are describing is called a drug cascade. So
Right.
let's say that you have a cardiac issue and you need to take a heart pill.
Hmm.
Most of them will cause bloating.
Hmm.
Bloating is very painful. It's mostly in your legs and feet. It
Hmm.
causes skin stretching. It limits your mobility. You find it difficult and painful to walk. And the last thing you want to do, particularly as people get older, is disencourage them to walk.
Right.
So they'll give you a water pill, a Lasix, something like that, which causes either diarrhea or constipation. So they'll give you something for that. So now you're on three drugs instead
Hmm.
of, you know, wow, I've got a heart issue. Let's try changing my lifestyle and my foods and
Hmm.
seeing if maybe some exercise is going to help strengthen my heart. Maybe
Hmm.
it won't. Maybe you need the pill. It's the other thing. You can't judge people when they choose to take a pill. It's their
Hmm.
decision. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's the best decision.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's the only decision. Sometimes it's a
Hmm.
bad decision. But who doesn't make all those mistakes every day in their life anyway? We
Hmm.
all, make mistakes and potentially wish we hadn't made that decision. But,
Hmm.
I can't judge people for
Hmm.
making the best decision they think they can at the time.
Well, and the point is there are so many options. And, we
You are
need
so
to
right.
educate ourselves. And, even if you have to make a flow sheet, which, I don't do flow sheets or what a spreadsheets. Yeah, no, I don't do stuff like that. But, just make a chart and, okay, these are my options and what are the pros and cons of each one. If you try one and if it works, great, it does, and then you're on your way. If it doesn't work, it's like, okay, I tried this. It's not the right solution for me. Go on to something else. There are always so many options. And I think that especially the way that, the media, the pharmaceutical companies, the medical community promotes the healing with medications, we get so panicky and we kind of buy into it because, my God, if I don't do this, I'm going to die.
Mhm. Yeah.
But, we're all going to die anyway someday.
Well, that's the other thing. We don't address death. And I'm very, like, I'm not going to be worried about breast cancer. I'm sure if and when that happens, I'm going to be like, oh my
Yeah,
God,
right.
I'm going to die. And it will happen someday. And I'm not looking forward to that moment. But
Hmm.
I'm going to put in a little plug here for
Hmm.
MedShadow.
Oh, please
Um,
do.
because
Absolutely.
because we have on our website for free, everything is free on our website. There's if you just Google on our website or do the search for side effect worksheet,
Hmm.
when you start a new medicine, just print this out and it gives you a day by day chart to say,
Mm.
how do I feel today? Am I nauseous? Am I tired? Am I nervous? Did I not sleep well? Do I have insomnia? just so that you are tracking what's different with taking this medicine. So then in your follow-up visit with your doctor, or if the side effects are such that you need attention sooner, you can call the doctor and say, I've been tracking and I'm finding that I have nausea 3 out of 5 days. That's not
Wow.
acceptable
Yeah.
to me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it also gives you a little confidence in going into, because the white coat syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
the doctor stands there in that beautiful clean white coat, and I'm like, yes, yes, ma'am. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
sir. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, stop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Doctors
Yeah.
are consultants. It's
Mm-hmm.
you who bear the results. It's
Mm-hmm.
your decision.
And if I might add, and I say this a lot to all my clients and people I talk to, you are your own best expert. You know yourself better than anybody else does. You know what your goals are, your hopes, your dreams. You know your history. You know your biology. Don't let anybody else try and talk you into something or out of something.
Yeah, yeah. What you did was so smart, because there are multiple drugs for almost every non-rare disease. Like
Hmm.
statins, are there 7 types of statins out there? And each one has a slightly different side effect profile. So you did the most wise thing. If you're discussing medicine with your doctor,
Hmm.
or don't forget your pharmacist, they're wonderful.
Hmm.
Pharmacists are drug experts. The doctor is a diagnostician.
Hmm.
So as you pick up a prescription from never do mail order if you can avoid it.
Hmm.
Pick it up in person, talk to your pharmacist, make sure, say to them, I'm also taking this and this,
Hmm.
and I like to take this vitamin pill or this supplement, or,
Hmm.
whatever, or athletic greens, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, then that's the last chance you have to avoid a conflict between two drugs, or an herb and a
Hmm.
drug, and causing yourself potential harm in that way,
Hmm.
because doctors make mistakes. But if you know, like that I'm not saying that you're prone to nausea, but
Hmm.
some drugs tend to irritate your stomach,
Mhm,
that
mhm,
you can say to the doctor or the pharmacist, even as late as that, I tend to get nauseous. Is this going to make me nauseous? And the
mhm,
pharmacist, for no money at all, will call your doctor and say, she says she gets nauseous. Do you mind if I switch this drug to XYZ, which
mhm,
is less nausea inducing? And the doctor is going to say, have at it.
mhm,
Or, no, I gave her this drug for a reason. But two
mhm,
medical professionals will consult on your behalf. It's a
mhm,
lovely thing.
mhm.
So,
Absolutely. Well, I try and keep it simple by staying off of everything. I don't even take Advil anymore. I had to take one a couple of days ago because I was like, oh my gosh, I have a headache. It's not going away. But I'm so incredibly just cautious about
yes.
anything that goes into my body because I've had enough experiences that even though this is supposed to be good for you, um, I don't think it really is. I mean, it does come with a little warning label. So I'm just incredibly cautious.
Yes. Yeah, I appreciate that you are. I think you're wise, and there's always time to think about stuff.
Hmm. And I thank you for just reiterating that you have time, you have options, even if you have a really bad diagnosis. Don't panic. Sit down, take a couple of days and think about it. Talk with other experts, and
Address.
tell us again, how can people get a hold of you? Where can they find you? All of your links are already in the show notes, and they're going to stay
Good.
there forever and ever. But I really like for the guests to articulate it because it's a little bit more personal.
Sure. So I launched MedShadow for this very reason, because sometimes it's very difficult to find out what the real life side effects are of a medicine.
Hmm.
So, and also what your alternatives are, and some
Hmm.
suggestions on just healthy living.
Hmm.
So you'll find tons of free articles on MedShadow, Med for medicine, and Shadow because drugs will follow you through your whole life. .org. We are medshadow.org because we're a nonprofit. We don't accept donations from pharmaceutical companies. We don't accept advertising from pharmaceutical companies. We do accept donations from other people. That's fine with me. Um, and you can reach me directly. My nickname is Sue, and I just spelled SU. So it's SU@medshadow.org. And if you can't find that side effects sheet and you want it, just email me and I'll send you a copy, and you can photocopy it all you like.
Mhm. I love the fact that you just emphasized in that little riff the healthy living part.
Yeah. Yes.
People forget about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can be so, so simple, even by starting by the next time you're in the grocery store, start reading labels. Let me tell you something, it is very eye opening.
I have started reading bread labels because I love bread. And I'm now trying to buy only bread that doesn't have sugar in it, which is
Hmm.
not hard and it's very tasty. But a lot of the bread I was buying out of habit had sugar added, and I've
Hmm.
substituted, and I don't miss it. So
No,
yeah.
there's sugar
But
in everything.
the easiest part, though, even easier than reading the label at the supermarket, an important part of your health is meeting your friends, having a social life, getting out of your apartment or your home. You cannot be healthy just on food and exercise. You need that
Hmm.
last leg to the stool, the three-legged stool. You
Hmm.
need social activity or
Hmm.
you're wither, and we don't
Hmm.
want that.
The power of the human connection.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that was the one thing that galled me. I mean, one of the many things that galled me during the pandemic. It's like we need each other,
Yeah, we
and
do.
that social interaction. We're social animals and social beings, and we really need that. So thank you. Sue, this has been fantastic. So much wonderful information. Thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great.
Oh, I love what you do. Thank you so much. And please, anybody who needs help, please reach out to me. I will do what I can. So.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for being on the show. And I'm glad that we got the FemiNinja thing sorted out.
I'm glad you are who you are.
Oh, I thank you. I appreciate that. So am I. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. Oh, please share this episode with everyone you know. Just think of you know, how much benefit other people can get from this information, and just to have that little caution sign going off in your head of just to think before you swallow. I think that's one of the best pieces of advice, as well as just following a healthy lifestyle. And do remember that very important aspect of human connection and socialization, and we'll all make this world a better place. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.